Mr. Markowitz's first reaction was, well, it's not the same property. I said, what are you talking about? Look, it's in your own database. The point is, how do you miss a structure that is so massive, it's probably bigger than some people's houses in certain parts of the village, and it's in plain sight 30 feet from the road. I went on and on. I'm not going to bore you with all the details, but you're talking about missing pools of record, pools that are listed with permit information. You're talking about sketches. My house has an attached garage, as it has had since 1932 when the house was built. Well, under vision appraisal, somehow that garage got severed in their mind. But, you know, Mr. Markowitz says, don't worry, it doesn't matter, the value is the same. But the point is, it's sloppy work. And when we talk about doing assessments, there's also the failure to process certificate of occupancy information. According to the assessor, when he gets permit data, and there's a pipeline between the villages and the town, that information, I see the box, you go into the village of Ryeburg building department, you'll see a box there, it's an outbox going to the town of Rye. When they get a permit, it goes in the box. When they get a C of O, it goes in the box. What they also get when you do say you take out a permit for a $100,000 job to do some exterior face-up to your house. And then while you're doing it, you decide, you know what? You get sucked in, let's do some work inside. Next thing you know, it's an exterior, interior job, and it's $200,000. At the end of the day, before you get, at least in Ryeburg, I don't know what they do in Portchester, but at least in Ryeburg, before you get that C of O, you have to do an application for C of O with what they call a certification of costs, right there on the form. Notarized statement from your contractor, your architect, or even the applicant. So now you've got to come clean. What is your finished product? Because the town, the village wants its, appropriate fee for the time spent. So there was a project recently that took out a C of O last year, and it was a $136,000 C of O, taken out in July. It got closed out in December for $250,000. The assessor has no clue about that. In his data, he's got that as a $136,000 permit, and it's on our block. So we've all seen the constructor figure it out. Between your house and my house, it's the house. And it's not about the individual property. It's about that there's a flawed methodology. If you can't even capture data that's given to you on a platter, you can't be expected to get data that's you got to go, shake the bushes for. And the problem here is there's another level of data. Vision Appraisal has a website. Everybody, I think, is under the impression that what you get on that website online from the comfort of your office or your home or wherever you have access to a PC, I was led to believe, and I'm a pretty well-informed person, but I was mistaken. I was led to believe that that data is the same as if I go to 10 Pearl Street. And I said, why do I want to go sit at two terminals outside the little, assessment office desk when I can do it from my own home and print and not pay 25 cents a page and on and on? Well, you know what I found out for the first time on Friday when I had a meeting with Mr. Markowitz, Mr. Noto, and I was given a copy of the so-called Vision Appraisal two-sided page for my property. It's an entirely different form. I never saw it before, and it's got a wealth of information. You know what it's got? It's got all the cost information. It tells you how they got when they appraise a property and it listed a certain value of replacement cost less depreciation, and you see that on your notice. You don't know how they got to it. You figure it's like just thrown into the machine and somehow it comes out. Well, when you see that sheet, you know exactly how they got it, because they have the unit, which is the square footage, the unit cost, and then they have, in the case of outbuildings, like I couldn't understand why my pool was twice as expensive in terms of the assessment as any pool around. My pool's from 1960. It's almost double the cost of pools in our area that were built in 2001, 2003. Some of them gunite pools. Couldn't figure it out. I asked Mr. Markowitz back in early May. He couldn't answer me. Of course, he didn't do anything about it, so it stayed the same, and I sought relief on the bar for that. But I did find out over the weekend when I was doing my bar application. I know the answer now. Somehow, inexplicably, there's a column there called CND on the vision appraisals, only that you're going to get at your office. You won't get it on the computer, on the web-based site. And there's a column called CND. And in my case, I had 1A, and the rest are all Gs. And I looked at other people, I saw they compare. Well, what's theirs? They had all A's, 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 A's. The house across the street from you, all the A. Their pool is A. Well, you know what I figured out? A is average. G is good. G comes with a 75%, and there's a column next to it that says percent CND. I asked Mr. Markowitz in our 5:30 meeting on Thursday, what is that column? What does that mean? He says, I don't know. Because the assessor doesn't know what his own consultant's data means. I figured it out because I started playing with the numbers. They have a unit cost for a concrete pool of $55 a square foot. You have a unit, how many square feet your pool is. You multiply that. Then you multiply it by the CND percent factor. Because what it's basically saying is, I'm paying 75% for my 1960 pool. I'm paying 75% of a $55 unit cost. But I'm not paying, that's my assessment. But the pool that's across from your house that was brand new back in '01, that's only assessed at 60%. And it makes no sense. You can't tell me a pool built 30, 40 years later is less value. So the point is, there's all kinds of data that the unsuspecting public doesn't have access to, that I think people that are involved in this, at the government level or even professionally don't know. And, I think if you're going to start collecting outbuildings and charging it separately and breaking it out, you better get it right. I said to Mr. Markowitz, how many people do you think have patios and decks? Because now, if you have a patio deck, or a pool, or shed, or detached garage, that's going to be part of your outbuilding. So, for example, in my case, my assessment on my outbuildings is almost $67,000. Pretty good sized chunk compared to some people's assessment. But whatever, they got a pool house, they got a pool, they got a shed, whatever. Got a detached garage. It's really not detached because it's part of my house, but that's another story. So I said to him, how many people do you think in Rybrook have, and I'm not focusing on the rest of the town because I focus on what I know best, which is Rybrook. How many people do you think have patios or decks? When you say practically every property, big and small, has some sort of patio or deck, even the Arbors, which has very small parcels, it's part of a HOA, they have decks. Belfair, they have decks. Everyone has a deck or a patio, sometimes both. He says, yes, I would agree with that. I said, then, so when you're looking at the vision appraisal's data, and you go property to property, and you see property after property says, no outbuildings, no outbuildings. You're saying no deck, no patio, no pool, no garage, no shed, no detached garage. I said, it makes no sense. Doesn't a bell go off to say, gee, we got to look at this closer? The point is, I know there's some people that think that vision appraisal has done, a world of difference from over the prior consultant. I don't see it. I see data that used to be accurate. I see data that if you look at the 1967 card, it's more accurate than your data today. So I think that something's got to be done, and I wasn't involved when you hired the vendor, and I don't know what your deliverables are. But one last thought I wanted to leave you with, and then I know I'm taking time, but I don't expect to be back anytime soon. I think the biggest problem that is what drew me into all this research is he did this extensive reval. We heard when they presented before Mayor Feinstein and her board on April 26th, we heard how they spent a year and a half, getting this process underway and doing their study. They got sales data from July 1 of 08 to July 1 of 2010. There's about 126 Rybrook parcels in that data. That's all there were. That's the sales that they have throughout the whole town for that 2-year period. There were 4 in what they call Neighborhood 2004, which is the neighborhood that includes Byram Ridge and the other side of King Street, where Castleview and Magnolia is, and then the one on King Street. So there were only 4 sales in that 2-year period in that area. 2 in Byram Ridge, 1 on King Street, which is outside the actual subdivision, and 1 on Castleview. And that's the data that Mitchell Markowitz refers to as the comparable sales. In 2004, when John Walsh did the thing, when you got your sales notice or your assessment notice, you got a sheet that had a picture of your property and all the data, and you had 3 other properties with their picture and their data. So you could do a side-by-side comparison. They showed you what the other 3 or 4 comparable properties are. You don't have that now. You have something that you press a button inside the vision appraisal web interface, and it spits out comparables that are ridiculous. For my house, they had a comparable of a $900,000 house in Country Ridge, something in Mamaroneck, and something nearby. It's ridiculous. That would never be what an appraiser would use. And the point is, this system is just flawed. And as hard as it is to think that with all the controversy that arose over the data collection under MJW, I got to tell you, their data was better than what I've sampled so far, and I've sampled at least 120 properties in one neighborhood. Their data was more accurate. Their sketches were more accurate. I'm not talking about whether, the values and the land and that's a different thing. But I'm talking about just inventory data. Their data was much better. And I just find it very frustrating because what they did with this data, the reason why I mentioned the sales, they made all kinds of changes to properties throughout the roll. But in Byram Ridge, and I've looked at all the data, and it's all in my spreadsheet, they did all kinds of changes on everyone's property. And so you figure their work product was done. They spent a year and a half. They had a March 31st roll. It was saying this is going to be on the June 1st tentative roll. And that was that. Well, May 27th, this is incredibly bad form. May 27th, 3 days before the tentative roll is filed, they generate a notice to almost everybody in that 120 parcel Byram Ridge subdivision. Everybody, with maybe 1 or 2 parcel exceptions, got a tax increase on the land of 20%. So some of us here we share. 2 of the members of this council share something in common with me. We all 3 live in the Byram Ridge subdivision. All 3 of us got 20% increases. Some of us got increases of 43% in March, and then another 20 in May. Some of our neighbors at the end of Hillendale got 30-something% in March, and another 20% in May. How could you defend a work product of any kind? I don't care what the business is, what the task is. How could you have a work product that's a year and a half in the making, and then 2 months later, based on comments made by Mayor Feinstein as a member of the public and a mayor, trying to get people to be aware of the issues of reval, makes some comments at a public meeting that, gee, I hear from people that they're concerned about that the land values in Byram Ridge aren't high enough. We don't pay enough taxes, and the assessments aren't high enough. Maybe we should look at that. And that's fine. I don't mind hearsay and anecdotal comments. But when I asked Mr. Dave Arnold on Friday, what was your basis? What study did you do between March and May 27th with the assessor that you concluded that Byram Ridge, after doing all kinds of assessment adjustments on the land, that the land across the board needed to be increased by 20%? He said, we looked at the sales. I said, oh, okay. What sales? Mr. Noda was there. He was very helpful, actually. He asked some of the questions. I asked a few. And he says, he named 2 sales. I said, oh, those are 2 of the 4, and the only 2 in Byram Ridge, that were in the 2008 to 2010 data. Those are the sales that you had to have used for the initial task of coming up with the March 31st preliminary roll. Because if you didn't use them then, you didn't use any sales. So, it's hard to imagine that you can expect a normal, rational person to believe that you use those 2 sales in March and came out with a result for 112 households and 120 parcels, and that you use those 2 sales again in May following attending a political meeting at one of the member villages, and then you expect us to believe that you did just manipulate the numbers, particularly when you stood up there and it's on tape and you go to the streaming video on the Rybrook website, www.rybrook.org, go to streaming video, go to April 26th, go to the first agenda item, click on it, it's a 38-minute discussion. You'll hear Mr. Arnold say how we can't track land sales without, because there are none. So we kind of, and you heard Mayor Feinstein comment about how you back into the numbers. The point is, they don't really have a scientific basis or a fact basis for what they did. But meanwhile, they lulled everybody into thinking if you have 2/3 of the people go down in March, that's 2/3 of the people you're probably not hearing from. And then when you go and you change an entire neighborhood and do what I believe is an arbitrary and capricious reassessment of the land with no sales to support it, certainly no land sales, and only 2 sales from one from '08, one from '09, you have no fact basis to come up with that conclusion that everybody in that 90-acre subdivision deserves another 20% increase on top of what they already had done for their assessment 2 months earlier. And then you do it as the window for the informal process had already closed because they stopped doing the so-called interviews on May 20th. So you get all these people get these notices, May 27th, done the notice. They don't get it until June 2nd when the roll is filed. So now their only relief is to go to the bar. And some of them might not go to the bar because they might feel they can't prevail at an assessment level, because even though they're under what their appraisal might be, that doesn't mean that the basis for adding on the 20% was flawed. So I share this with you. Obviously, you've got a long meeting, and I don't want to take up, you've been very generous with the time, and I thank you. But I just think that you've got to look at what your consultant is supposed to be doing. They're certainly not doing curbside checks, because I can give you example after example of how they missed things in plain sight. They're certainly not looking at the historical data. They're not looking at aerial photographs. They talk about their geospan photography and all their orthothermal, whatever images. None of that is available to us like it is. Similar stuff is available on the SDG NYS database that was buried for a period of time. So I don't know, but this has not been the most transparent second round of the reval. And I think it's not your intention to not be transparent, but I think you have a system. And when I asked Mr. Markowitz in closing on Thursday, what about, why is there a different database at 10 Pearl Street than there is on the web, and you don't tell people that there's more data you really wanted at 10 Pearl? His answer is, well, we know that the vision appraisal website needs to be redone. I'm thinking, what are you going to do it after the reval's over, after people's bar opportunities are been foreclosed, or are you going to do it before the process? And I would think before you come into a 2007 reval, that's not the time to shut down a website that has access to all that historical data. People are smart enough to figure out 2010 assessment is different than 2011, but that data, that inventory data, those photographs are invaluable, because what it enabled me to do in a matter of days is to see all the pools that they missed, all the garages they missed. Most of it's sitting right there in the data. All someone had to do, a high school kid could do it. You got to look at the data. And in closing, one thing, I'm tired of hearing the assessor's answer be, I've got 11,000 parcels. I've got 11,000 parcels. You've had 7 years to get the reval data correct. And when I asked what happened to all the data that John Watch collected, because I still have his submissions to me, and his data, his inventory, his sketches are more accurate than what I've gotten from Vision, his answer is, oh, we didn't keep that. So it's mind-boggling. And I know every government thinks that their consultant's the best and they're going to do it a better way than the last. But you know what? And maybe it's not for lack of trying, but I got to tell you what I've seen so far, and I'm going to continue doing the analysis. I'm going to share it with you, because that's the intent, is to share and improve. I don't see the work product being worth what people are going to be forced to go through with inequitable assessment based on flawed data and a flawed methodology. So I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Stanton. Thanks for taking time to come and talk to us this evening. And sharing your thoughts. I guess there's a couple of things. The first thing is, you're absolutely right. There's nothing more important the town does than assessment. And, we take your concerns very seriously. And to that end, one of the things I'm going to be proposing to the board tonight is that we have a meeting next Tuesday evening dedicated solely to this, where we've asked Mr. Arnold to come and Mr. Markowitz to sit down with the public this is a Rocktown meeting, obviously.
Yeah, she's at a library meeting.
I wish we would have known we have a regularly scheduled Rybrook meeting. I would have loved to be at that meeting to give input, because I would have loved to be at the meeting, because the advice of Carvin. One of the problems that I have is that I've been getting phone calls from residents. And Dean is absolutely correct. 2/3 of the residents are not going to complain. They may have gone down. They may not have gone down as much as they should have. That's another issue. But if your assessment goes down, you're not going to breathe. Other people are not going to the bar because they feel as if I go to the bar, maybe my assessment will go up. And that's incorrect. show up when you go before the bar. And I've tried through the Westmore News, through our meetings. The fact is, I'm a proponent of revout. I've always been a proponent. I want equity. To the extent that the data may be flawed, and I know Dean does his research, what happens is, if data is missing, the pool is not picked up, structure is not picked up, who's picking that up?
Everyone else.
Everyone else. And that is my concern. And I haven't done all, I've done some research. As you know, I've fielded many phone calls. That's the reason we had an initial meeting in April, a private meeting to talk about some of the phone calls that we received, followed by the meeting very graciously on April 26th with Mitch Markowitz and Dave Arnold. And I did give some observations that I'd gotten from the community members and the like. And I was also a little bit dismayed to find out that an entire Byron Ridge may have gone up, and I had no prior notice of that at all. I would have liked to have known that, because it certainly does impact the residents of Rybrook. But in any case, I would love to be able to, at least to be able to attend a meeting or have village officials be at a meeting, but we have our regularly scheduled.
What time is your regularly scheduled meeting?
We have an executive session that usually starts at about 6:45, and we start our public meeting at 7:30.
I think I think it's before we go forward with our meeting.
And I know that you tried.
If Mr. Arnold's available, what I'm more than happy to do is have him meet with your board. If you want to give him, sit down before you're at 6 o'clock, for example.
We can't. We have village officials, unfortunately, working in the city, can't get home for that.
Okay.
But thank you. I wish we could be in attendance. I did not know about the meeting.
No, well,
This is the first
obviously
I heard
this
that.
is
Yeah.
all.
Can we reschedule?
Thank you.
No, and the second thing we're going to do is we're going to make Mr. Arnold and Mr. Marcus available for informal hearings for those people who, as Mr. Santon suggested, had their property's value go up from the initial tentative roll to the next roll. Those people have an experience. At least they'll have an opportunity to sit down with an informal meeting.
But they won't have the opportunity anymore to go before the bar.
And if they didn't file, they're out of luck.
So they're out of luck, because as we said before at a Town Parks Commission meeting, you have to go to the bar first before
Right.
you can take the next. So
Yeah.
they would be out for a year.
Yeah.
My issue here is equity. That's all I care about, that all of the residents of the town of Rye, all the taxpayers pay their fair share.
Of course, and obviously that's our concern as well. And that's why we wanted to bring Mr. Arnold here. Mr. Mark will sit down. I want to look at the data collection. There could be an area that's bad. I would be surprised and enormously disappointed that after everything we've done, the data collection hasn't improved. As you pointed out, Mr. Mark was been the assessor for 6 years, certainly 5 years, maybe 6 years. He was there. I don't want to go into. I don't want to say one more time.
All right.
So I'd be disappointed. We've invested money, as everybody in this board knows, in aerial photography, curbside photography,
Absolutely.
the vision appraisal people. We did street site visits. We did physical inspections of all the commercial properties. So I'd be very disappointed. So there's two issues. One is the data collection. There's no excuse for not being correct.
Right.
And clearly it should get better every year. Mr. Markowitz has been there for 5-6 years, so it should get better every year.
Right.
That's the first thing. In terms of the actual valuation, it's an art form. I would argue that the land values to the building value ratio in Hillandale, for example, Byron Ridge, the land values seem low versus the building value. The actual valuation seemed about right, but the land value, building value ratio is probably a bit off. But that's a particular area. I think that what we want him to do is come and present his methodology. Mr. Commissioner, Councilman Gelfer, and myself, we interviewed 10 different firms. Went through a lengthy process. These guys have a wonderful track record throughout New England. So, I like Mr. Arnold, and of course, Mayor Feinstein. When this first came out, we had you in.
Yes.
The president of the Blind Brook School Board
Steve
meeting
Apple was there as well.
with Mr. Arnold, and we look. Our goal is very straightforward. If we got it wrong, we want to make it right, and we want to get the role needs to improve every day. going forward. You're going to be with us for another 2 years, and so I think that'll be a positive rather than a negative. I think that there will be, and this kind of feedback from the community is helpful. And I want to encourage this kind of feedback from people to get our roles better. It's funny, in Argentina, what is ours? You never think this. If you don't go report your mistaken record, and they find it out, they will sue you, and they will sue you for back taxes. Quite frankly, that's the way I like to do it. So the person because remember, we sent a mailing out to all these people, and all these people have an obligation to look at their property record cards that you made a mistake. So clearly those 4 people that are sitting there with swimming pools in their
But
backyard.
that data wasn't on there.
Pardon?
They didn't ask, do you have a pool?
Well, but they know you. If you're sitting, you lie in your swimming pool, you look at the data card.
But the data card didn't address pools, only the assessment.
Well, in any case.
That's the point. It was silent on a lot of the data.
So in any case, so my goal is the same as your goal, is to make it as equitable as possible. I think we've made more progress than hopefully you're alluding to, but let's sit down with Mr. Arnold next Tuesday, and thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
Any other comments from the public? Okay. If not, then we'll go to presentation from our accountants who've been sitting patiently from Sedore Company. Jim Laterio and Jeff Brown, thank you for coming today.
Thank you so much, Harvard and town board members. My name is Jim Laterio with Neighborhood Today. My name is Jim Laterio from the accounting firm Sedore and Company CPAs. I'm here with my partner Jeff Brown, who's actually in charge of accounting for the audit and preparation of the financial statements. You have with you tonight, we have given you a draft of the December 31, 2010 audit financial statements, and also the comments that we have, some of the comments. And we are going to do a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation, to go over the results of that audit. And for the sake of time, we like to go over a summary, Jeff will go over a summary of the financial statement information. Our agenda will include 3 items tonight. Just a quick overview of the audit process and the report. I will do that in a moment. The second item, the highlights of the financial statements themselves. Jeff will go through that with you. And the last section, the auditor's communications, I will touch on that at the end. The first section, the overview of the audit process. The nature and the purpose of the audit. The purpose of the audit is to give an opinion on the financial statements of the town. The town prepares the financial statements. Our job is to give an opinion as to whether or not they are fairly presented in their format. We do an audit, what we call governmental accounting, governmental auditing standards, which are certain lower standards and compliance rules that we have to follow, especially for governmental audits. As part of our audit, we have to obtain an understanding of your internal controls, which are your policies and procedures that you have in place to record your revenues, your expenditures, and the recording of the preparation of your financial statements. These are the procedures that you have in place to do all of that. As part of our audit, we have to test those controls. We do that not with every area, but we do test compliance with these controls that you have in place with the municipality. We also have to examine significant audit areas. We do that through what we call the risk assessment practice process. We go through each of these different areas and see where the highest risk areas are, where we have the highest risk of misrepresenting or misrecording your transactions. So that's part of our audit process. Our responsibility as auditors is to express opinion on those financial statements. We have, in your draft financial statements, the first couple pages are the auditor's opinion. And that's basically the only part of that statement that is ours. The rest of those financial statements are the numbers coming from the tab, which we audit, And the town, along with our assistants, will prepare those financial statements, including the footnotes. But our opinion is the important part